I represent myself when I'm sharing what I'm sharing as an educator and a museum professional, and of course being a Narragansett citizen, I share Native culture from my perspective. And that's why we recommend advisory councils, because, and folks to come in for each institution to partner with their local Native community, because they get that diverse perspective from each individual from these local Native communities, but they also gain a personal perspective and a personal story, because most of the museums are telling the story from a third-person perspective. Yet this exhibit has done a great job of telling it from a first-person perspective. And when you bring in guests, partners from the Native community, and you hire artists and Native educators and storytellers
that came out of that process,
performers, it allows you to have first-person experiences from your local Native community or from the communities that are represented in this exhibit.
So I was wondering if you could speak about what is the best way both to identify a partnering organization and also how to maintain that relationship.
Well, I think the first thing people should do is reach out to their tribe. Usually they have a website in this modern day. You might target education, or cultural resources is sometimes the name of the department, or historic preservation, to name just a couple of sort of the titles that they have that kind of deal with, sometimes tribes have their own tribal museum, or like in our case, we have a community museum that's not completely under the umbrella of the tribe, but is run by tribal members. So I would see what the opportunities are out there. And the other place that you would look is Native artists. I mean, there's great resources. Your state arts councils often are working with Native artists and can give and educators and can give recommendations. Regional arts organizations also do the same. Like I know New England Foundation for the Arts often has lots of Native art artists registered there. So that's another great place, because usually Native artists also have a great capacity for education as well, because they just delve into the culture and the nuances, and they're expressing everything that they feel about our history through their art. So that's a great opportunity as well. But the biggest thing is to forge relationships with people that then can either certainly become part of your committee and or refer you to other people. Tamaquag Museum and myself as the executive director, we refer people to all kinds of Native community members, artists, educators, environmentalists, you name it. So we all know what building a relationship takes. It takes time, it takes energy and effort. You can't expect that just because you reached out, that they're all going to be like, yay, let's work with this children's museum and do this. I think you have to be realistic that relationships take time for people to feel that the situation is sincere and that their opinion is being respected, and that one of the worst things that can happen is for someone to call up at the last minute when something's pretty much all done and then try to get what I call the Native stamp of approval. They do that with me a lot, and I push right back, whether that's doing a book or a curriculum or a multitude of other things. They love to give it to you when they think it's done. And I sort of think that they just want to make sure it's really good, but the problem lies in when they're completely off, then they're really hurt. Like they take it very personal, because now you're like, ooh, I can't stamp approval of this. So that goes along with the exhibits and the design. And I think Boston Children's Museum was really good about that. They didn't come to us as the Native advisory and say, hey, this is the exhibit we want to do, and here's our prototype, and here's how we think it should go. What do you think? They said, we'd really like to do a Native American exhibit, and we're not really sure how it should go. Let's talk about this. And we had all those people around the table, and it took a while to get to not only the theme of sort of where it was going, but then to break it down into all its parts. It was a long process. The beauty of it is that's where all the relationships got built, all through that process. And I think we had a great exhibit at the end. You know, we can always critique something and make it even better, but I think that Children's has even been good at that. As this exhibit has been here and then traveled and then come back, they've gone, oh, you know, while it's here, we could improve this a little bit, or we could add that, and it would just make it that much more meaningful or more engaging, or, you know, this material didn't really work out really well, let's try something new. I think. And then also the training piece of, okay, we learned this the first go around, but we need to scaffold deeper this time. And I think that all of that is part of my own relationship with this project, but also the relationships with other Native advisors to this project. And I think that each museum it visits, as they build relationships with the Native community that's near them, they will find, and it might be multiple communities because different regions are different in that way. You know, in Massachusetts, it can be the Nipmuc, it can be the Aquinnah Wampanoag, the Mashpee Wampanoag, to name just a couple. So you want to be able to reach out and engage as many of those communities as you can. And you, in my opinion, you also would like to engage them in different kinds of ways. People that are really strong in the history, but also people that are really strong in the culture and really strong in the arts, and bring all of those people to the table, because I think it gives a bigger view, you know, of thoughts around the exhibits and the concepts that are being presented, and it gives, everyone says something a little bit differently. They might be coming to the same point in the center, but they express it differently. And I think for those that are learning from them, they learn by having different voices and how it's represented, and as well as for adding depth to the exhibits and the concepts.
So, you know, we go through this development process, we come out the other end with an exhibit, the exhibit is installed. What are good ways, you think, of maintaining a relationship with those communities once you've sort of completed that process and now the exhibit is here? And of course, once the exhibit was installed here, we were always prototyping new things. So as long as there's a cost, but what are good ways to sort of maintain those relationships?
I think that there's a variety of things. I think, and I think Boston Children's has really done this well. One, their advisory council was compensated, you know, for their skills and knowledge. Two, they hired Native artists to come in and do storytelling, flute playing, be arts educators, which in essence helped their staff also learn how to present and represent some of these cultural arts to the masses, if you will, where when an artist comes in, it's more a workshop style, a smaller group of numbers and things like that. They also just continue to communicate with each other and see, are there ways that you can support their community? Can you, because I won't say always, because there are some really big Native museums, but a lot of Native museums are small, and sometimes your staff capacity and your expertise maybe in museum studies and structure can be helpful. So just as much as the Native artists and educators can support you in content competencies that they have, sometimes you can give that back in reverse. And support their growing tribal museums or Native-run museums with skills and structures that you have. I think just like anything, when it's a relationship, it has to, in order to grow, you have to communicate, you have to have, you know, a give and take in the relationship, and it has to be meaningful. And if it's all of those things, it'll continue to grow and continue to move forward.
Since you'd mentioned artists, what are things that a museum can do to make sure that the artists that they work with and the educators they work with are supported?
First, I think that there's a lot of opportunity with Native artists for demonstrations, for contemporary exhibits, for workshops and classes, trainings for staff, but also for the public. there's lots of Native authors that write children's books, and I know there are many up and down the East Coast. That's another great opportunity to have them come in, share their book. It's a workshop, but there's that. It can be something that's in your gift shop at a later point in time. But it connects your exhibit to people today from those same communities where people can leave with something in their hand that connects to them. I also think the Children's Museum has been good over the years at also hiring musicians, drummers, flute players, those that are doing very traditional music and some that are doing a blend of contemporary and traditional. I think that's really great way as well, because it's another way to take in the culture. Even in the exhibits, if you listen, there's a couple of places where there's music, in the powwow portion. I think in the Nuituan school portion has flute music. And I think that is really important. And then it also spotlights these Native artists in different kinds of ways.
I can speak to this because from the other side, so I was working at a museum and I work with dozens and dozens of mostly performing artists and other artists and educators, and oftentimes it's like, oh, we're a nonprofit and we have so little funds. Maybe they'll do it pro bono and it's going to be great exposure for the work that they do, or give them an opportunity to represent. To represent their culture, and they might be willing to waive a fee, or we're already paying them to consult, so maybe we'll just add this other thing on. We have our own sort of policies and practices about that, but I want to talk to you about that because you're also an artist and an educator.
Yeah, I really push back on that a lot, and I think it's back to the misconceptions and the stereotypes. I think that there's this notion, and maybe this crosses lots of diverse cultures, like very culturally specific cultures, that there's this notion that we should just be happy to represent our people and do that, and people don't necessarily take the respect that, I'll use myself as an example. I didn't become a Native educator, if you will, just because I was born Indigenous, that there's a skill that is required and that was learning throughout my life in culturally specific ways as well as academic ways, since I'm an educator as well, that deserves to be remunerated appropriately. With that being said, when you partner with people, sometimes there are times where you can work something out. But what we would like to advise is that people don't make an assumption that all Native people should want to do performance, dance, music, just because it's nice to share your culture. That people are doing this to share their culture and to educate people, but they're also doing it for their careers and their businesses, if you will, if they're independent artists and things like that. And that this is how they stay culturally connected and are able to tie that into their career rather than having some external career and then you kind of have your culture just with your family. This is a way to do it both in your career as well as in your life. But it's definitely something that should be remunerated. And I think that it's great for the institutions to be aware of that ahead of time and to not only be ready to be told that there's a fee, but to offer as well. And I think that a lot of people in general are willing to be reasonable. But I think that we've come to a place in this world that it's time for it to not be an assumption that Native artists should do it for free, because there really is a stereotype around that they should. I would also recommend, that kind of made me think of that as well, is that in their opportunity in this exhibit, I mean, there's the whole exhibit with the 5 communities that are there, but if they have the opportunity to make an exhibit to go with it from their home Native communities, I think that's really beneficial, even if it's small, to connect people to the Indigenous community that's there, because that is really important for recognizing the people whose homeland you're on, and to respect the Indigenous communities that are there, and share some of their culture, even if it is in a small way.